did everything right.
Most people know about the initial delays in admitting to the Chernobyl disaster, but what many don't realize is just how hilariously absurd the timeline of secrecy, denials, and reluctant confessions truly was. Workers are panicking, fires are raging, and radioactive material is spilling into the atmosphere like confetti at a dystopian parade. But what does the Soviet government decide to do is play the world's most dangerous game of pretend it didn't happen. It's as if they thought they could just slap a wet floor sign on the reactor and hope nobody slipped on the fallout. So they take a long drag of a cigarette, sigh, and say, "Let's keep this between us." Hour 0. It's probably fine. Immediately after the explosion, the control room staff is in complete chaos. Someone radios their higher-ups to report the obvious. "Hey, we think the reactor just exploded." The response? "No, it didn't. Reactors don't explode. You must be mistaken." To confirm everything is fine, they send workers to check the reactor. These poor guys walk straight into radiation levels so high it's essentially a death sentence. They come back barely and report that yes, the reactor is gone. It's obliterated.
There is no core. It exploded. The core exploded.
But does that stop the denial?
You're confused. RBMK reactor cores don't explode.
Nope. The plant's officials still try to downplay the situation. It's just a little fire, they say. Meanwhile, radiation is shooting into the sky, and the wind is carrying it to nearby towns. Day 1. Business as usual in Pripyat. Pripyat, the city built to house the plant workers, is just 3 kilometers away, and it's home to 50,000 people. By now, radiation levels are so high that being outside is basically the equivalent of sunbathing in Chernobyl's glow. But what does the government do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The people of Pripyat go about their day, shopping, walking their dogs, walking their kids, having picnics. No one has any idea they're in the middle of a nuclear disaster. The government doesn't even think to evacuate until 36 hours after the explosion. Day 2, Sweden blows the whistle. By now, radiation has spread so far that it's tripped alarms at a nuclear power plant in Sweden, hundreds of miles away. Swedish scientists initially think they've got a leak on their hands. You know how those power plants can get a bit leaky. Well, they run tests, double-check their equipment, and then realize the radiation isn't coming from them. Oh no, it's coming from the Soviet Union. So Sweden picks up the phone and calls Moscow. "Hey, are you guys letting loose a bit of nuclear death clouds over here?" The Soviet response? "Who? Us? No, everything's fine. You're fine. We're fine. Tee-hee." But Sweden isn't buying it. They've already traced the radiation back to Chernobyl, and they're not about to let this slide. With international pressure mounting, the Soviets finally admit something happened. And then, on April 28th, 2 whole days after the explosion, they release a statement. "A small incident has occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, but we have it all under control, guys." Sounds awesome. Hell yeah! Weeks later, the ugly truth pie in people's faces. Here's the thing about power plants presenting us with a nuclear disaster. They're really bad at keeping secrets. Over the next few weeks, the Soviet Union tried everything to keep the lid on reactor number 4. Metaphorically, of course, because the actual lid had been blown into the orbit. But as it turns out, you can't hide a radioactive catastrophe when satellite images show a glowing crater where the whole fucking reactor used to be. Radiation levels were measured as far away as North America. Birds were dropping mid-flight, cows started glowing, it probably felt like that, and scientists around the world were scratching their heads. Meanwhile, Soviet hospitals were packed with plant workers and first responders suffering from radiation sickness, and doctors were running out of ways to explain why their patients looked like they had sunburns from the inside out. Finally, after weeks of mounting evidence, the Soviet Union had no choice but to go public in the most Soviet way possible. On May 14th, so 18 days. 18 whole days, y'all. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev went on TV, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, and admitted to the world that, yes, something had happened at Chernobyl. But even then, he couldn't resist a little deflection. He blamed the Western media for exaggerating the story, basically calling them drama queens, which is like spilling coffee on your boss's desk and saying, "You know, the lighting in here really makes it look worse. And it's fine, just a little reactor hiccup, happens all the time." Meanwhile, radioactive clouds are basically on a full-blown European tour. Damage control, heroics on a budget. By summer, Soviet state media was hard at work spinning the Chernobyl cleanup into a tale of triumph. Liquidators were shown bravely tackling the reactor ruins in spotless uniforms, like the perfect Soviet poster boys. The term liquidator sounds like a Soviet assassin, but it was actually the dramatic title for anyone sent to clean up the mess after disasters. Instead of eliminating enemies, they were eliminating radioactive dirt, often with gear so basic it could have doubled as gardening equipment. Heroic? Yes. Deadly? Also yes. Meanwhile, villages within the fallout zone were evacuated with the reassuring promise that it was only temporary. Families packed as if they'd be back by the weekend, because surely radiation works on a tight schedule. When people started falling sick, doctors pointed to anything but the obvious: stress, bad food, or maybe a particularly unlucky draft of wind. Officially, though, everything was still under control, provided you didn't notice the deserted towns or the steadily growing list of strange medical cases. But, believe it or not, thanks to the efforts of as much as 600,000 liquidators, whoa, that's a lot, worst-case scenarios were largely avoided. Construction of another achievement has been finished in November: the sarcophagus. A massive concrete and steel lid slapped over Reactor 4 to keep the radioactive chaos contained. Built in just 206 days, it was quite the quick fix. Not perfect, a little cracked, but effective enough to stop the reactor from spewing more radiation. Think of it as the industrial equivalent of throwing a blanket over a messy bed before guests arrive. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't permanent, that's for sure, but it worked. Without it, the reactor might have kept leaking, and the neighbors, all of Europe, would have had a lot more to complain about. I guess we're lucky after all, guys. But no, wait. I think we're most lucky because even after years of that toxic, mysterious, charming excitement in the air, new information about the infamous fallout kept getting out in very small doses. And then, most informations, especially the true ones, actually came out only when the Soviet Union fell apart. So, just 5 to 10 years later. Wow. The funniest thing, the point I'm trying to make about all of this is, you just know that if Sweden hadn't detected the radiation, the Soviet Union likely would have kept quiet forever. Because why admit a problem of that caliber if no one's asking questions, right? So I'm gonna ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel because you'll be supporting a team of people who are huge fans of strange ways in which history unfolds. Most importantly, don't hold back from sharing your questions, opinions, and ideas about historical moments and stories that you find interesting.